Welcome to our section on nitrogen. This section is probably one of the most important for most turf managers. This is the limiting nutrient. This is a picture of one of my favorite golf courses, Brora, in way northern Scotland, same longitude and latitude as Juneau, Alaska. But you can see Ian's got a great big hunk of turf there, really deep, healthy roots. And if you hit on that, if you take your putter and hit it on the ground, it sounds like mahogany there. So that's a really tight, nice putting surface. It might not be the greenest surface you've ever seen, but it's assured it's a magnificent putting surface and much better growing healthy turf with limited nitrogen than some golf courses where we would over fertilize with nitrogen. One of the two major functions of nitrogen are, one, it's in the chlorophyll molecule, so without it the plant would get chlorosis, that term up there at the top, and it's also an integral part of all the amino acids. Amine is amino is nitrogen, so all proteins, enzymes, and vitamins in plants contain nitrogen. And here is that chlorophyll molecule that I was talking about. If you recall, we originally, an iron would be there where the magnesium is, and then the iron comes out, so the iron's a catalyst for the production of chlorophyll. The magnesium is put in there. The nitrogens, you can see the four amines, nitrogens around that central magnesium, which forms the chlorophyll molecule, which provides for all of the growth of plants and survival on Earth. Chlorophyll is very, very important. We talked about rubisco when we talked about C3 and C4 plants, but both C3 and C4 plants and all green plants have chlorophyll, and it's the only molecule that can fix CO2 to make sugar. This slide here is not required for the test, but it just shows that all of the amino acids, glycine you can see is the simplest, has a nitrogen there. Alanine, aspartame, all of them have nitrogens built in to them. So every amino acid, if it's an amino acid, if it's building something like muscle in humans or structured proteins in plants, it is an amino acid. So there we have all our amino acids. One of the main problems with nitrogen in measurement and why it's not on the soil test is nitrate is an anion. It moves quickly through the soil profile, so we can't measure it. Ammonium is a cation, but it's a finicky, expensive test, so you can get that done, but it can be expensive. So nitrogen is going to be best measured in tissue samples. And just for your reference, if you're ever doing tissue samples, 6% is often observed in turfgrass. That's a high amount of nitrogen for most plants. That's actually higher than Milorganite, some products that are put down. So this is a pretty good argument for returning your clippings back to your turfgrass. Nitrogen promotes rapid vegetative growth in green color. Again, proteins we talked about before and chlorophyll are both products of nitrogen. You can't make proteins, you can't have a green colored grass without adequate nitrogen, but excessive nitrogen can cause problems. 97 to 99% of the total nitrogen in the soil is going to be organic matter. So that is not available to the plant. That has to be mineralized by microorganisms for the plant to get it. The available forms are ammonium, NH4+, which is the cation, and nitrate, NO3-, which is the anion. This is a slide here that I stole from the University of Missouri, but I like the balloon, and this talks about volatilization. You don't need to know this equation, but you do need to know what volatilization is. Volatilization is when you have nitrogen, NH4, and it gets in with the hydroxyl and OH-, we can get NH3, which stays in the soil, and then no, NH3, which becomes a gas, excuse me, and goes off into the air again with hydrogen. So that's ammonia gas. So this does not happen that much in the turf grass system. It can happen if you're using very quickly released nitrogen, ammonia, which could be from urea. But just know that some of the nitrogen can be volatilized, and that's an important concept to understand. So here's our nitrogen cycle. This I definitely want you to spend some time on and understand how nitrogen moves through the soil. We're going to start with an organic form of nitrogen. So there's our donkey. He's depositing some nitrogen. There's a lot of nitrogen in fecal material that will quickly be mineralized. Things will want to eat that. Microorganisms and some macroorganisms, but mostly microorganisms are going to get in there, and they're going to decompose that organic matter, and they're going to make ammonia, NH4. The ammonia is going to quickly be made to NO3, NO2, and immobilized. So nitrate and ammonia can both be taken up, and that's what this arrow stands for here, can be taken up by the plant. So we have our ammonia, which goes to nitrate. So ammonia is going to be our cation, the NH4, and nitrate, NO3. Both of those forms can be taken up by the plant. If it's taking up the ammonia, it's going to acidify the soil. If it's taking up the nitrate, it's going to make the soil a little more basic. So a lot of what's going on is releasing these hydrogen ions to acidify the soils, particularly in the sandhills. Denitrification, there's our volatilization, so that would be immobilized into the air. That's a very small arrow. That's not happening that much. But do know that a major portion, in the 90%, depending on who you talk to or where the air is nitrogen in the air. That is not available for the plant. No plants can take that nitrogen and use it to make proteins. They must get help from somebody to do that, and that's an expensive process with energy-wise. There are bacteria that can do that, and there are also fertilizer plants that can do that. The bacteria would be a symbiotic fixation with a legume. So any of the pod or vegetables or minerals like, not minerals, vegetables, plants like clover would form a symbiotic relationship with root nodules where the plant shares the sugar it makes with the bacteria, and the bacteria shares the nitrogen it fixes from the air. So that's symbiotic. That's a win-win relationship. So clover is an important rhizome, is an important nitrogen-fixing plant. Soybeans are another very important nitrogen-fixing plant. Redbud is another important nitrogen-fixing plant. So important to understand this, review it in a book somewhere, know these terms, and know how nitrogen moves and what form that it mostly is in. And remember, a lot of it is in the form of immobilized, either in the plants or in the soil as organic matter. Something I would like you to think about and come back to me in class with questions is man's effect on the nitrogen cycle. What does farming do? What does taking a native prairie and farming it, how does that affect the nitrogen in the entire system? How does a golf course affect the nitrogen in the system? How does a home lawn affect the total nitrogen in the system? So you should be able to answer this question for the exam and our next exam. When you over-fertilize turf grasses or any plants, you're going to have softer, weaker plants, less collagen. They're going to get signals to grow shoots. They will be much more prone to diseases and insects. When I walk out on Augusta, I just feel that humidity. You feel those plants growing, those big succulent nitrogen-filled cells. And if I were an insect or something that made its living eating turf, I would want to eat there at Augusta. So that's why they probably spend a lot more on fungicides than places that don't fertilize as much. The plant is going to mature much slower. It will harden off much slower. So if you have lots of fertilization in an area where you need to harden off your Bermuda grass, that's going to be a problem. You can have more winter kill. And that quick growth on your vegetables in your garden, if excessive nitrogen will cause it to lose flavor and have nitrogen buildup. So lots of bad things can come from overdoing nitrogen, but nitrogen is an important nutrient to maintain green color and top growth. So here's an important number calculation that we want to do. You want to be able to do this calculation. If you have 100 grams of urea, that would be a nitrogen fertilizer, and a 3-foot wide drop spreader, and you walk 20 feet with 873 grams left in the spreader, how much nitrogen is being applied per 1,000 square feet? This is a good way to calibrate a sprayer, and we all should know how to do this for math class. This should be a review. A little bit of a review how to do this problem. I'm not going to do it for you, but I will review it if you do it and give you the proper answer. First, how much product is applied to the area above. Second, use a ratio to find the product applied per 1,000 feet squared. How much nitrogen was applied to the 1,000 feet squared, so you got to figure out how much nitrogen is in urea, and that's a 4600 would be a little hint for you. And then get it to the proper units. So you're going to multiply by 1. The biggest problem most students make is they attempt to do too many steps at once and they forget to keep track of their units. So there's a change of units up in that problem, and I would like you to work that as homework. Stop the video till you get that right and ask me if you're having troubles with that. This slide here is one of the mortal sins of turfgrass management, killing grass with nitrogen. So the only time I ever want to see any of my students kill grass with nitrogen is in lab. What happened in this slide is we have this area was given 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. This area was given 0 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And this area was given 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Proper amount of nitrogen, under fertilized, you can see the lighter color, 10 times too much, and we have the plant dead. And it's dead for an interesting reason. This is a mortal sin of turfgrass. I never want to see you over fertilize an area, except on purpose, but it's dead because it's desiccated. The salt has pulled the water out of the plant and it has died from the process of osmosis. One of the most common places we see this on a golf course is the Wiley spreader has a reciprocating tube on the back. I'm sure all of you have seen that. What I would do is force my guys to leave that tube going all the time, because oftentimes if you turn the tube off but there's still fertilizer falling into that hopper, the first time you turn it on again, all that fertilizer is going to go into one spot and kill the turf where that fertilizer is concentrated. So we never want to concentrate fertilizer. We want to be very careful applying fertilizer, and we only want our best people out there doing that. One other simple concept, if you put nitrogen down, it signals to the plant that it's getting enough nutrients from the ground and it's going to grow shoots and stop growing roots. So that shoot to root ratio is managed by nitrogen levels. Nitrogen is going to increase disease. There's a balance of color, clipping yield, overall turf appearance, but in general, Pythium and brown patch are diseases from excessive nitrogen. Deficient nitrogen diseases would be dollar spot and red thread. So much easier to manage low nitrogen diseases than to manage high nitrogen diseases. And there's some stuff going on with dollar spot. It's getting a little more difficult to manage, but still a much easier disease to manage than Pythium and brown patch that we'll talk about when we get next fall talking about diseases in our advanced turf class. One of the really most simple ways to calculate nitrogen is going to be 1 pound. Never apply more than 1 pound of nitrogen per growing month. On cool season grasses, we don't want to over fertilize in the spring when the plant's growing anyway. Keep the color right. Increase that in the fall helps store some sugar for the winter, so we have that hardening off, again, balance, but never more than 1 pound per 1,000 square feet per growing month. Late fall fertilization is a controversial issue. After shoots have stopped growing, particularly in the north in Michigan, some turf managers will apply fertilizer. It gets you an early green up. You get the nitrogen start to activate when the snow starts to melt. It tends to work. One of the problems with that, or is there a problem with that, and one of the conventional wisdom for the problems is that would be the time you would get leaching. You would get nitrogen that would move through the system into groundwater or places like that. That's been tested a little bit. It hasn't been shown to be as big a problem as people would think, but it's still something to keep in your mind before you attempt to apply fertilizer to a turf grass that's not growing. So if you're applying fertilizer to a turf grass that's not growing in your area for your project, you want to be careful about that. This is a nice program for cool season grasses. We can see in the early spring we're applying half a pound to 3/4 of a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. June and July, pull back depending on your area. August and September coming up a little bit, and then a little bit higher fertilization would be okay in the fall. And that's even probably going to stay under a pound there. So if you're getting over a pound, you need to justify that in your report. Here's a nice chart that shows shoot growth differences. Cool season grass in yellow, warm season grass in red. We're going to see that June and July, the cool season grass is going to suffer. We're not going to have as much growth. We don't want to give it a lot of nitrogen because it'll just be fighting that and we'll be promoting disease. We would fertilize the cool season grass on the cusp, where Bermuda grass, warm season grasses, we're going to fertilize a pound of nitrogen per month, per growing month, per 1,000 square feet. And there's our standard recommendation. You can adjust that depending on the soil type. You might want to make more applications in a sandy soil as opposed to a clay soil. Weather. Oftentimes turf managers will fertilize when rain is coming. Here's a little picture to drive that home. We would not want to fertilize this Bermuda grass when it's dormant in the winter, but the bent grass might need a little bit of fertility at this time if it's growing, if we get a little bit of warm weather. Again, that's an art, the art of turf management. Here's another look at a dormant golf course. Nice and clean, chemically cleaned up. The overseeded ryegrass here on the tee might need a little bit of extra fertility to keep it from getting chlorotic. And chlorosis is a yellowing of in color. Our overseeded turf grasses, a half to a pound per 1,000 square feet per growing month. Again, just enough to avoid going off color, lighter green. Primary goal is the survival of the warm season grass. You can raise the height of cut in the fall to allow carbohydrate storage on that warm season grass. Lower height of cut in the spring to increase light to the C4 plants. So a little bit about fertilizer. For your project, you're going to be picking fertilizers for your athletic field. Water-soluble nitrogen is quickly released. It's taken up quickly by the plant. It can often be applied in a sprayer or in a drop spreader. The turf responds quickly. There's more potential for burn. There's a lot more potential for leaching. It's generally cheaper. Water-insoluble nitrogen is released more slowly. There's two forms of that. There's natural organics, manure, chicken shit, if to use a little bit of French, and synthetic organic is going to be something that's more man-made. So a longer response, less burn, you'd have to apply that less. So you would make a water-insoluble application less often. So you might save money, even though it's a more expensive product, by having to spend less on labor. So to think about the difference, what is the definition, the difference between organic and inorganic? And you should know carbon is the difference. So organic sources of nitrogen are going to be plant or animal based, and they're going to be generally made up of carbon. There will be nitrogen in there. So proteins are being broken down, amino acids are being broken down, they're being mineralized, and the mineral nitrogen is going to become available. Temperature will affect the rate of change in organic nitrogens. Again, natural organics originate from plants. There are also some synthetic organics where man will make a carbon molecule similar to protein that's available. Again, pluses and minuses to that. I like some of the natural organics because they have a few more micronutrients in there that will also be mineralized along with the nitrogen, so you're not going to see any weird micronutrient deficiencies. Sources of inorganic: ammonium nitrate, NH4NO3, ammonium sulfate, NH4SO4, calcium nitrate, CaNO3, 2, potassium nitrate, KNO. So if you needed potassium, potassium nitrate might be your best source. If you needed to apply calcium, which you might more often, calcium nitrate might be your source. Your source might depend on cost. Leon Lucas was talking the other day that fertilizer used to be much cheaper. Now it's still an expense. You get a bang for your buck, but it's less. So pick your nitrogen sources wisely. This hygroscopic effect, these inorganics will quickly release from water. So you don't want to apply these in the rain, but you like to apply them right before rain so they're available to the plant, but they will clump, and you have some problems with that. So a lot of spreaders will have a top to them to avoid this. Once the bag is open, you pretty much need to use it because it's going to be useless if you leave it out for any length of time. Some natural organics, trademarked Milorganite, dried, heated, and granulated sewage sludge from Milwaukee, again about 6% nitrogen. Animal manure, one is called Sustain, a processed poultry manure, obviously nice smell. Plant products, Renaissance is a soybean protein, so a plant protein with 10% nitrogen. It's fairly expensive because they have to grow it. So you can use any of these, or you could go right back to Donald Ross and drive your truck up to the cave and fill it with guano, and that's an excellent nitrogen source too. So one of the things we tend to have to try to prove to ourselves year after year is nitrogen makes grass greener. Every big university does a test every year that shows nitrogen in any form will green the grass up more than a plot that has no nitrogen. And they do that because all of these companies, to get these registered trademarks, pay somebody to do a test so they can compare each other. But pretty much nitrogen greens up grass. Urea is one of our quick release synthetic organics. There's the formula for that. Here you can see the nitrogen connected with the carbon and an oxygen. This is the most widely used turf fertilizer. It's a white crystalline water-soluble product. It can be mixed with liquid when you're spraying or applied as a granular. It's a high nitrogen content, a little bit less burn than an ammonium nitrate, which is a higher concentrate, and it's inexpensive. So this is what I use for my home lawn because I'm cheap. And that's it. It's the most nitrogen bang for your buck. Usually it was about $5 a bag last time I bought it. So 50 pounds of urea is going to yield 46%, 0.46 times 5, right around a little bit less than 25 pounds of nitrogen. Where if you were using something that was a 10-10-10, it would only yield 5 pounds of nitrogen. Some slow release synthetic organics, longer chemical change, urea formaldehyde, methyl ureas and IBDUs, isobutadiene diurea, so IBDUs, 31% nitrogen. I'm not going to read all this to you. Others can be encapsulated, and I'm going to give you a little demonstration here in the next couple of slides about sulfur-coated urea. That is urea we talked about in the last slide, coated with sulfur, so it's going to have a little bit less of a percentage of nitrogen, but by coating it with this sulfur, we get a slow release effect. And then there's polymer-coated urea, a much more expensive product, but a much more controlled release, and the next slide should show that. So stop your tape here for a second and read these over and get ready to go on to the next slide. So here we go. We've got our sulfur-coated urea, and we see our urea prill, the white inside, and then we coat that with sulfur. We get some water, our hydrogen hydroxide, our H2O comes into the mix, and it starts eating at that sulfur. And it can go through the sulfur, but at a slow rate. Once it gets under there, it gets into the urea and starts to expand the urea. That pushes out on the sulfur, and bam, we get a catastrophic release of nitrogen. Boom, boom. So quick, all at once, that pellet gives off nitrogen. So the question you ask is, how do we get a slow release out of sulfur-coated urea if it's all going to release at the same time? It just releases when the water gets in there, so it might be 5 days, might be 10 days. We don't have a lot of control over that. This is why we get release over a period of time. You can see some of the prills are damaged being carried in, so this urea is going to get out quicker. Some have thicker sulfur, so this one's going to come out less. A thinner sulfur, less damage. So the randomness of the manufacturing of the sulfur-coated urea is how we draw out the release of the nitrogen. Some will be available right away. Some will be available 1 day, 5 days, 10 days. So it's not a smooth release. It tends to release in clumps. So we'll get a little bit of release at the beginning, maybe 20%, and then 5 days later we might have 10%, and then 15 days later we might have 20 more percent. So it comes in spurts. So it's not as regulated as a polymer-coated urea. But still, we can take it and get out there and fertilize. So hopefully in this lecture on nitrogen, we have made you more capable as a fertilizer spreader, and also more capable as the person that tells the fertilizer spreader what to do and makes good decisions and has good, solid, healthy turf where a little bit of nitrogen is good. Remember, excessive nitrogen is definitely not good for the health of your turfgrass plants.